makes a big difference. My sense of self, my sense of personhood, all of those things inevitably just end up directing my life, the decisions I take, where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do, how I feel about certain things, how I react to certain situations. It's a big question, and it's important that we get the answers to it. And different cultures and moments in history have taken different approaches to how you answer that question. This is probably too much of a generalization, but in a simple sense, you could divide it into two different ways of working out identity. More traditional cultures, and we're a room of all kinds of mixed backgrounds, so some of this may resonate for some in the room. More traditional cultures tend to work out the answer to the question, who am I, by asking the question, where have I come from? Okay, where have I come from? Traditional cultures, they say, where have I come from? Where have I come from? So, what family have I come from? What country have I come from? What culture have I come from? Those are the things that will tend to define who I am. You know, I am the son of so-and-so. I'm the grandson of so-and-so. I am Ghanaian. I am Iranian. I am whatever. These are the things that define me and give me my sense of self. They're all kind of external things, if you like. Things that are external to me, but nonetheless define my sense of self. And there are real strengths to that way of doing things. For one thing, it reflects reality, doesn't it? I am my parents' son. I can't shake that off. That's kind of written into my DNA. It's part of who I've grown up to be, and whether I want to or not, I can't really shake that off. It just reflects reality. The ethnicity we grew up in, the culture we were part of, they define us in very powerful ways. And as a way of understanding ourselves, it's got a real strength in that it leads to community. Traditional cultures tend to be very community strong. If I'm defined by the same things you're defined by, then that naturally brings us together and gives us commitment to each other. It means that there's an intergenerational strength as well, because you have a commitment to passing down the wisdom of the generations. The country that we're from defines us. I want to learn that country. I want to understand it. It breeds really strong community. But it can have real weaknesses. So, for example, it tends, as a way of understanding ourselves, to fail to recognize the individuality of any one person. You're defined by corporate characteristics rather than any kind of individuality that might be true of you. And traditional cultures can tend to be quite hierarchical in their structure. And it might be that as you're listening, you're thinking to yourself, I don't like the sound of that. I don't want someone outside of me to tell me who I am. And if you're thinking that, that's probably because you're from a more Western culture. Because Western culture tends to do things a little differently. Rather than looking outside and saying, where have I come from to define my sense of self, Western culture, certainly in the last 20 or 30 years, has taken a more inward turn and now says you've got to look inside yourself to work out who you are. It's a less corporate way of doing identity and a more individualistic way of doing identity. The chief exponents of this in our culture are Disney. Disney are the experts at telling us this worldview. They do it through their kids' films. So, for example, The Little Mermaid is all about Ariel, the mermaid, who ignores her dad's advice, her family and what they say she should do, and throws off her fins and goes and falls in love. Or more recently, Frozen. So in Frozen, Elsa famously turns away from her parents, who tell her that she should kind of keep it all in and restrain herself, and runs off into the mountains in order to let it go, to be herself all of a sudden. The best example most recently was the film Moana, if you saw this film, where Moana, this young lady, turns away from her father and her tribe and her ancestors and instead listens to her grandmother, who says these words to her. She says, you may hear a voice inside, and if the voice starts to whisper to follow the furthest star, Moana, that voice inside you is who you are. You see the difference? Traditional culture says, who are you? Well, you're defined by where you've come from. And Western culture says, no, you're defined by a voice inside. So what some people have called expressive individualism, and coined phrases like follow your heart, be true to yourself, you do you. All of these different maxims are ways of saying, if you want to work out who you truly are, don't let anyone outside tell you. Instead, you look on the inside. And again, as an approach, it has some real strengths. So it recognizes our individuality and our uniqueness and celebrates that. It leads to an appreciation of diversity. Rather than feeling we all need to celebrate the same things, we can recognize difference and enjoy that in each other. And it can, in the best moments, lead to a real concern for those on the margins of society, and a desire to bring them in and to include them. It's a wonderfully inclusive way of working out identity. But it has real weaknesses as well, because it's an inherently more self-centered approach to working out who you are and what you should do. It tends to lead to what people sometimes think of as a voyage of discovery that is centered in on me. That's what my life is about, discovering who I am, and everybody else needs to make way in order for me to do that. It can lead, and that's true in London, to societies that are more fragmented in nature, because you don't feel these common bonds to those around you. Instead, it's all about you and who you are, and you going your way. And often, rather than bringing clarity to our sense of who we are, as it hopes to do, instead it can just bring more confusion. To go back to Disney, there's a film called The Incredibles that came out a few years ago. And in it, there's this character called Buddy. And Mr. Incredible is one of the great superheroes. Buddy is this kind of fanboy of Mr. Incredible, follows him around everywhere. But then in a moment of exasperation, he cries out and says to Mr. Incredible, you always say, be true to yourself, but you never say which part of yourself to be true to. And I think that's often the experience of people who try to look on the inside to work out who they are, because when they look on the inside, what they discover is not a kind of crystal clear sense of self, but instead a kind of muddled mix of desires and wants and dreams and hopes in a way that actually leads to pressure rather than clarity. And maybe in no small part the contributing factor to the mental health epidemic that our society is going through. So where do you look, therefore, to work out who you truly are? If you look around you and see some truth in that approach, it resonates, and yet at the same time find it to be inadequate. Or on the other hand, you look on the inside of who you are and you find that resonates somewhat, but again, you find that to be inadequate. Where do you look? Well, the Bible's answer to this question, which I hope you don't mind me giving you tonight, is that rather than looking around to work out fundamentally who you are, or looking on the inside to work out fundamentally who you are, the Bible would say you should look up to work out first and foremost who you are. To an identity that has been given to every single human being, that both underpins our sense of self and explains the other experiences of identity that we have. Because when we look up, the Bible says that there is a God who has given us all a wonderful, unique identity, that being that we're created in the image of God as human beings. So, Genesis chapter 1. Genesis, if you don't know, is the first book of the Bible. And in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, there is an account, a poetic account of how human beings came into existence. And there's this wonderful poetic line in Genesis chapter 1 that says this: God created humanity in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. So human beings, very simply put, are created in the image of God. Now, a lot of ink has been spilled to try and explain that reality, and we don't have time to kind of do it full justice tonight. But simply put, to be in the image of God, the Bible would say, is to be like God in the world. To be, if you like, a bit like mirrors, reflecting God to the world around us. And there are many and various ways that works out. Too many that we have power to or time to explain tonight. But as a concept, this idea of being in the image of God as human beings has huge explanatory power for why we are the way that we are. Being in the image of God explains why we are so very, very different from the animal kingdom, for example. The normal explanation for our difference from the animal kingdom is that we exist at a higher state of evolution. That may or may not be true. I'm not here to argue for the merits or demerits of evolution, but to my mind it doesn't quite do justice to the difference that we do actually see between us and the other animals. To our profound rationality, the fact that we can work out complex mathematical equations, that we enjoy thinking deep philosophical thoughts, something profound and unique about that. That's the image of God within us. Our concern with morality, ethical systems that human beings have worked out over time and down through the ages. Our creativity. Human beings, they sit at an easel with canvas painting things simply for the love of creating. It's the image of God within us. Our deep and profound relationality. That means we enjoy being family, we enjoy being friends, we enjoy getting to know different people. We could add more and more rationality, morality, creativity, relationality, all because of being in the image of God. It explains why it is that human beings are capable of so much that is so amazing. We live in London and we're surrounded all the time by incredible engineering, feats of engineering. We've been able to fly to the moon and back. We've mapped the human genome and DNA. We are able to create incredible symphonies, come up with elaborate systems of government. We can build hospitals where people can be cared for. We have produced the Krispy Kreme donut, for goodness sake, the high point of the human culinary experience. And we could go on listing incredible things about human beings that just seem to kind of blow our minds. It's because we're made in the image of God. Who are we? Well, the Bible would say, first and foremost, you and I, every single human being, carries with us the image of God. It explains so much of why we are the way we are, and it confers incredible dignity on human beings. Who am I and do I matter? That was the question we were given, and the answer the Bible gives is, yeah, you matter profoundly, because you were created in the image of God. And it's that truth that has driven so much good in human society over the years. The UN Charter of Human Rights wasn't constructed by the United Nations in the middle of the last century. No, it has its roots in the 12th century and Christian monks who, because of this conviction, decided human rights were a natural outworking of being created in the image of God. William Wilberforce, who spearheaded the fight to eradicate slavery in this country, did it because he was convinced all human beings were created equal in the image of God with a fundamental dignity. Martin Luther King is on record as saying that the civil rights movement in America was driven by him because he was convinced all human beings were created with a dignity in the image of God. And we could go on listing fundamental good causes driven by that conviction. Why is it that we think human beings are so special? You find it almost impossible to hold a newborn baby in your arms and say, it's just a sack of cells and a bag of skin. There's something miraculous about a newborn baby because of the image of God. Why do human beings long for transcendence? We need significance, we need purpose, we want meaning. In fact, so many people want some connection with what they perceive as the spiritual. Why? Because we're created in the image of God. Why do we think it's fundamentally wrong to just kill another person, despite the fact that we live in a world where the worldview is survival of the fittest? Because the image of God in each human being makes us fundamentally different and special. We could go on and on and on. The Bible says very simply, your fundamental identity is that you're created in the image of God. But you might be thinking, as I was talking, okay, all of these good things, that's great. But what about the bad things? Because human beings created in the image of God are capable of wonderful good things, but at the same time we seem capable of terrible and evil things. Why is that the case if we're created in the image of God? Well, again, the Bible has an answer to that question. The answer being that whilst in Genesis chapter 1 you have an account of the creation of humanity as in the image of God, when you get to Genesis chapter 3, there is an account of the entry into the world and the human experience of sin. It's a moment in the Bible story that's a paradigm, if you like, for understanding our human experience that says every single human being, from the first humans up until today, have, as it were, declared unilateral independence from God. We say to God, sometimes subtly and quietly and covertly, other times loudly and shaking our fists, I want to live without you in the world that you've made, doing things my way. It's almost the kind of natural knee-jerk response of the human heart. The picture, if you like, is of us as children. Children are in the image of their parents, so it kind of works as an image. We're in the image of God. He made us. He made this wonderful world that we live in. But we as children, rather than enjoying and living with that healthy independence, if you like, that children should grow up to enjoy from parents, a commitment to and an enjoyment of the relationship whilst at the same time exercising responsibility, instead what human beings have done is to say to God, no, we're going to go it alone, thank you very much. The Bible calls that sin, a rebellion against God and his good plans and a desire to live on our own from him. And when we do that, the Bible says it's as though a kind of crack or lots of cracks developed in the image of God within us, such that whilst we can do wonderful good things still, at the same time we are capable of terrible evil. And that's true as we look out at the world around us. I'm sure we've all got the experiences we could share, and certainly as we look at the news, you see that that's the case. But actually, if we're honest, it's true when we look on the inside as well. Whether you look on the outside to determine who you are, you see a mixed state of affairs. And my guess is if you look on the inside to work out who you are, you see a really mixed state of affairs. Because of this combination of the image of God within us and the presence of sin in our lives. Who am I? Well, the answer the Bible would give is that you are created in the image of God, but that image has been broken in a way that breaks not just our experience of life in this world, but crucially our relationship with the God who made us. In a way that sometimes should cause us to think, would it be better if we all just got the chance to die and start again? Is that what we need to go through? And that's where Jesus Christ comes into the story in the Bible's understanding. Because when Jesus Christ comes into the world, the Bible gives him the title, the image of the invisible God. In more than one place, that's the title the Bible uses to describe Jesus. He's the image of the invisible God, which is a statement that has two perspectives to it. First of all, it says, well, Jesus is God made visible. God is inherently invisible, but he becomes a human being in Jesus Christ. But also in the sense that Jesus is the kind of high point of humanity. Remember, humanity is created in the image of God. Jesus Christ is the perfect essence of that. He is the image of God par excellence. And my recommendation, if you do one thing on the back of tonight, would be that you go away and try and find one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because those are the eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus Christ. And as you read that and see what the eyewitnesses said about Jesus, you will read the story of someone who was always only ever perfect. I mean, he did amazing and wonderfully good and incredibly powerful things. And he spoke words that were unlike words anyone had ever spoken before. Those who heard him teach said, we've never heard anything like this before. And all of that was accompanied by this incredible magnetic personality that Jesus had, that meant that people were never turned off by him, but were always rather drawn to him. They wanted to spend time with him. They wanted to receive whatever it was that he was giving. Why? Because he was the image of God walking in the world. He embodied that incredible good that we've talked about, but he never manifested that awful evil that we've also talked about. And you might have thought that if the perfect human being walked the earth, he would live a life of perfect peace and prosperity. But if you know one thing about Jesus Christ, it's probably that you know he died in the end. That was the end result of Jesus' life. He died in his early 30s. And some have said, well, that surely was just a tragic waste of an otherwise promising human life. Surely it shouldn't have gone that way. But the Bible would say, no, in fact, the opposite is the case. Jesus Christ is the human being par excellence. He's God in human form. And he did, in a sense, the thing that every human being should do. That is to say, he served other people. Because if you ask Jesus what his death was about, or the Bible, he would say it wasn't a purposeless waste of a life. It was the ultimate expression of what it means to be a human being. Because as he died, the Bible says he was taking on all of the failings of human beings on himself. He was enduring the consequences of that failure. There's a moment when Jesus is hanging on the cross where he says these words. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? If ever there was a human being who shouldn't have been forsaken, it was Jesus Christ. But when he dies on the cross, that's what he says he's going through. He's being forsaken by God. And the reason is because he's taking upon himself what in a sense should come to every single one of us. But Jesus' death wasn't hopeless, nor was it wasn't purposeless, nor was it hopeless, I should say, because history records that Jesus also rose from the dead. Now, I appreciate that might raise all kinds of questions that you want to get answers to, but that simply is the Bible's account. Jesus died, and 3 days later he rose from the dead in a spectacular victory over death that represents the ultimate fresh start for humanity. And Jesus says himself, and the Bible says again and again, that anyone who comes to him, anyone who follows him, as it were, anyone who says, I will trust in you, can receive, as it were, not just the fruits of his death for themselves, but the fruits of his new life again. If you ever think to yourself, maybe it would be better if we all just died and started again, the Bible says that in and through Jesus Christ, you can. You can get his death, and you can get his life. As we close, let me just read you a short story that comes from the New Testament. In fact, it's a story, well, not just a story, it's the events surrounding the final death of Jesus Christ. Because there's a moment that's recorded, I guess because his disciples were all stood around the foot of the cross listening in, where Jesus is hanging there, and on both sides he has other criminals who are being crucified at the same time. That's what's going on as these words are recorded. One of the criminals who was hanged railed at Jesus, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving a due reward for our deeds, but this man has done nothing." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." You see here, hanging on the cross next to Jesus, is a man who knows he deserves nothing. He's open and honest about it. We are receiving what we are due for our crimes, he says. He knows he deserves to be dying even in that moment. He experiences the brokenness, as it were, of the image of God. And yet he has the courage to turn to Jesus because he sees something in Jesus and to say to him, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And what Jesus says is a spectacular revelation of what Jesus is really all about. He says very simply, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That word paradise, it kind of, in one sense, throws the mind back to the Garden of Eden, where humanity lived in that perfect state of being in the image of God, and at the same time throws the mind forwards to a place of eternal blessing. And Jesus says to this man, "I will restore you to the full image of God that you were created to be, and I'll guarantee that for you forever." And Jesus can say that not just because he's speaking words of optimistic, cross your fingers and hope for the best, but because he knows he's dying the death that that man should die, so that he can live the future life that he promises. So as we close, or as I pause for a moment before you ask some questions, the question we were asking tonight is, who am I and do I matter? And the Bible gives two stages to that answer very simply. Who are you? Well, you're created in the image of God's spectacular purpose, spectacular dignity. And so that's who you are. Do you matter? Yes, profoundly you matter to God. You're created in his image. You matter in the first instance. But then the Bible says you matter in a second instance. You matter so much that God would come into the world in the form of Jesus Christ, the perfect human being. He would lay down his life and rise again to promise you a restoration of the image of God within you and a restoration of the relationship that we were created for. And that is the heart of the hope of the Christian message. So I'm going to pause and hand back to you, David.